Vecra pulled her thin, worn cloak tighter around her shoulders as the cold wind swept through the narrow alley. The sky above the city of Haven 3 was always a dull shade of gray. The tall metal buildings stretched high, their lights flickering softly in the evening gloom. Humans walked the main streets, busy with their lives, while aliens like Vecra stayed in the shadows, unseen and unwanted. Her stomach growled softly, a painful reminder that she hadn't eaten all day. She sighed and knelt beside a large trash bin, hoping to find something, anything, left behind. It wasn't the life she wanted, but it was the life she had. Vecra was Xilari, a species known for their delicate features, silver-blue skin, and bright, glowing eyes. Once she had lived on her peaceful home planet, crafting beautiful things with her hands. But that life was gone. After a war destroyed her world, the survivors scattered across the galaxy. Many came to human colonies like Haven 3, searching for a new beginning. But humans didn't trust the Xilari. They called them strays and refused to offer decent work. Without a job, Vecra had no money. Without money, she had no food. Still, she refused to give up. Her fingers, thin and trembling from the cold, sifted through discarded boxes and empty food containers. Most of it was useless. Broken gadgets, spoiled leftovers, but she kept looking. Some days, she found enough to survive. Other days, she went to bed hungry. Today seemed like another empty day. As she reached deeper into the bin, her hand touched something smooth and cold. It wasn't trash. Curious, she pulled it out and held it under the faint streetlight. A ring. It gleamed softly in her palm, a golden band with a deep blue gemstone at its center. It didn't look cheap. It didn't belong in a trash bin. Vecra's heart pounded softly in her chest. She had never held anything so beautiful before. For a moment, she wondered who it belonged to. Someone important, perhaps. Someone wealthy. Someone human. Her first thought was to sell it. A ring like this could fetch enough credits to buy food for weeks, maybe even months. No more digging through trash. No more hunger. The idea was tempting, but something held her back. Why would someone throw away something so precious? Was it a mistake? Vecra bit her lip, thinking. Humans rarely cared about her kind. No one would blame her if she kept it. But deep inside, she knew it wasn't right. Her gaze drifted to the distant lights of the city's upper district. That's where the rich humans lived, the ones who had more than enough. If the ring belonged to someone there, maybe they were searching for it. Maybe they would reward her if she returned it, or maybe they would just send her away like always. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that this ring was important. She slipped it carefully into the pocket of her cloak and stood up. Her legs ached from crouching, but she ignored the pain. She would think about it tonight. Maybe she would find the owner. Maybe her luck was finally changing. As Vecra stepped out of the alley, a cold breeze brushed against her face, but she didn't care. For the first time in a long while, hope flickered inside her heart. Far across the city, in a grand house lined with shining windows, a human named Daniel sat at his desk, his hands running through his hair. His eyes stared at the empty velvet box where the ring used to be. It wasn't just any ring. It had belonged to his grandmother, a woman who had raised him when no one else would. She had always told him, "This ring is special. It carries the weight of love and family. Never lose it." But now, it was gone. Daniel had searched every corner of his house and every street he had walked that day. Nothing. He felt a deep ache in his chest. Losing the ring felt like losing a part of his past, a part of the only family he had left. He placed the empty box on the shelf and leaned back in his chair. Maybe it was truly lost. Maybe he would never see it again. But out there in the cold night, Vecra held the ring close. Neither of them knew that fate had already begun to weave their lives together in ways they could never imagine. And this was only the beginning. The next morning, Vecra woke early. The small room she called home was nothing more than a broken storage unit on the edge of the city. The metal walls were cold, and the roof leaked when it rained, but it was better than nothing. She stretched her arms, feeling the ache in her muscles from another restless night. Her fingers brushed against the pocket of her cloak where the ring still rested. She pulled it out, holding it carefully in her palm. The golden band shimmered in the dim light, and the blue gemstone seemed to glow softly. It was beautiful, too beautiful for someone to throw away. Vecra sighed. She could sell it. A ring like this would fetch enough credits to buy food, warm clothes, and maybe even a better place to live. The thought was tempting, but she knew it wasn't right. Whoever lost this ring must be missing it. And deep inside, Vecra knew she wasn't a thief. She slipped the ring back into her pocket, stood up, and wrapped her cloak tightly around her shoulders. Today, she would try to find its owner. The streets of Haven 3 were already busy. Humans filled the markets, their voices loud as they bargained and laughed. Aliens like Vecra stayed on the edges, trying not to be noticed. She kept her head down as she walked, avoiding the curious stares. She had no idea where to start. The upper district was far from here, guarded by security gates and drones. Only humans with special passes could enter easily. But Vecra had nothing else to lose. If she wanted to find the ring's owner, she had to try. As she reached the edge of the market, a large screen above a shop caught her eye. A human man with kind brown eyes and messy dark hair filled the screen. His voice was calm but worried. "I lost something very important," he said. "A gold ring with a blue stone. It means a lot to me. If anyone finds it, please return it. There will be a reward." Vecra's heart raced. It had to be the same ring. She memorized the man's face and the address flashing below the screen. His name was Daniel, and he lived in the upper district. A reward. The word echoed in her mind. She didn't care much about riches, but a reward could change everything. Maybe Daniel would give her enough credits to survive. Maybe even enough to escape this life. With a deep breath, Vecra turned and headed toward the upper district. The path grew cleaner and quieter as she walked. Gone were the noisy markets and crowded streets. Here, the air smelled fresh, and polished buildings rose high into the sky. Vecra felt out of place, her worn clothes and tired face standing in sharp contrast to the bright, perfect world around her. When she reached the security gate, her heart pounded in her chest. A tall, metal-faced guard blocked her way. "No strays allowed," the guard said coldly, eyeing her up and down. I'm not here to cause trouble," Vecra said softly. "I found something important." The guard frowned but didn't move. Vecra's hands trembled as she pulled the ring from her pocket and held it up. "I think this belongs to a human named Daniel," she added. "He said he lost it." For a long moment, the guard said nothing. Vecra held her breath, hoping he wouldn't send her away. Finally, the guard tapped his wrist device and spoke into it. "Someone's here about the lost ring," he said. Minutes later, a new voice echoed through the gate speaker. It was warm and curious. "Let her in." The gate slid open with a soft hum, and Vecra stepped inside, her heart beating fast. She followed a smooth stone path to a large house surrounded by glowing gardens. Everything looked clean, bright, and beautiful, so different from the rough streets she knew. At the door, a man stood waiting. He was the same one from the screen, Daniel. Up close, he looked even kinder, his eyes filled with hope and curiosity. Vecra hesitated, then held out the ring. I think this is yours," she said quietly. Daniel's face lit up with relief. "You found it," he said, taking the ring gently from her hand. "I thought it was gone forever." For a moment, he simply stared at it, as if remembering something precious. Then he looked back at her, smiling. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "You don't know how much this means to me." Vecra shifted nervously. "I saw your message," she explained. "I thought maybe you'd want it back." "I'm glad you did," Daniel replied. "Please, come inside. At least let me offer you something to eat. It's the least I can do." Vecra hesitated. No human had ever invited her inside their home before, but her stomach growled softly, reminding her of how hungry she was. Maybe, for once, kindness wasn't too much to hope for. With a small nod, she stepped through the door, not knowing that this simple act would change her life forever. Vecra stepped carefully into the grand house, her worn shoes barely making a sound on the polished floor. The warmth of the room wrapped around her like a soft blanket, a sharp contrast to the cold streets outside. She had never been in a place like this before. The walls were lined with shelves full of books and strange human artifacts. Soft lights glowed from the ceiling, casting a golden hue over everything. Daniel closed the door behind her and smiled warmly. "Please, sit down," he said, motioning toward a comfortable chair near a low table. Vecra hesitated for a moment before slowly settling into the chair. It was soft, softer than anything she had ever sat on. She tried not to show how amazed she felt, but her curious eyes wandered over the room, taking in every detail. "You must be hungry," Daniel said, noticing her thin frame. Without waiting for her to answer, he disappeared into another room. Vecra sat quietly, unsure if she had made the right choice by coming here. Humans were not known for their kindness toward her kind. Yet, Daniel seemed different. Moments later, he returned carrying a tray filled with food, a bowl of hot soup, fresh bread, and a small plate of sweet fruit. He placed it gently in front of her. "Here, eat as much as you like," he said softly. Vecra's hands trembled slightly as she picked up the spoon. The rich scent of the soup made her mouth water, and she couldn't resist taking a careful sip. Warmth spread through her, chasing away the cold that had settled deep inside. For the first time in a long while, she felt safe. "This is very kind of you," she said quietly, glancing up at him. Daniel smiled as he sat across from her. "It's the least I can do. You returned something very important to me." His fingers brushed against the ring, which now rested safely on his hand. "I thought it was gone forever." Vecra tilted her head slightly. "Why is it so special?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. He leaned back in his chair, his smile fading into a thoughtful expression. "It belonged to my grandmother," he explained. "She raised me after my parents were lost in a deep space accident. This ring, it was her most treasured possession. She always said it was a symbol of love and family. Losing it felt like losing a part of her." Vecra listened quietly, sensing the deep emotion in his words. She understood the pain of losing family. Her own world had been torn apart, leaving her alone in a strange galaxy. "You must miss her very much," she said gently. "I do," Daniel admitted, his voice softer now. "But in a way, having this ring back feels like a piece of her is still with me. And I have you to thank for that." Vecra lowered her gaze, unsure how to respond. She wasn't used to kindness, especially from a human. Most people ignored her, or worse, treated her like she didn't belong. But Daniel was different. He looked at her not with fear or suspicion, but with genuine gratitude. "Why did you return it?" he asked suddenly. "You could have sold it for a lot of credits." Vecra hesitated before answering. "I thought about it," she admitted honestly. "I need food, a place to live, but keeping it felt wrong. It wasn't mine. And I know what it's like to lose something you can never replace." Her word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken pain. Daniel studied her carefully, realizing that there was much more to this alien woman than he had first assumed. She was not just a stray trying to survive. She was someone who had known loss, hardship, and yet still chose to do the right thing. "You're a good person, Vecra," he said softly. Hearing her name spoken with such kindness surprised her. Most humans never bothered to ask, let alone say it with respect. A strange warmth bloomed in her chest, something she hadn't felt in a long time. For a while, they sat in comfortable silence as she finished her meal. The food filled the aching emptiness in her stomach, but something else filled a different kind of hunger, the longing to be seen, to be understood. When she set the spoon down, Daniel leaned forward slightly. You know, he said thoughtfully, I could use some help around here. I work as a scientist, and things get busy. If you're willing, I could offer you a job. A real job. Vekra's heart skipped a beat. A job. No human had ever offered her honest work before. For so long, she had been treated like nothing more than a burden. But here was someone offering her a chance, not just to survive, but to live. You would trust me? She asked carefully. Daniel smiled again, his warmth unwavering. You returned something priceless to me. I think that says everything I need to know. A soft breath escaped her lips as hope flickered in her heart. Maybe her life didn't have to be one endless struggle. Maybe, for the first time, things were about to change for the better. I would like that, she said quietly. And in that simple agreement, a new path opened, one neither of them could have predicted. The days that followed were unlike anything Vekra had ever known. Each morning, she arrived at Daniel's house, no longer afraid of the guards at the gate. The first time she passed without being questioned, she realized something had changed. She was no longer an outsider to be chased away. Her work began with simple tasks. She cleaned the research lab, organized his notes, and helped maintain the machines Daniel used for his scientific experiments. It wasn't easy, but Vekra worked hard. For the first time in years, she felt useful. She wasn't just surviving, she was living. Daniel, too, seemed happier with her around. His days were filled with complex research on energy systems, but he always made time to talk to her. Their conversations grew longer and deeper. He asked questions about her homeworld, and Vekra found herself sharing stories she thought she had forgotten. Stories of silver forests, glowing rivers, and the art her people once crafted. You were an artisan, Daniel asked one evening as he adjusted a piece of equipment. Yes, Vekra nodded, a distant look in her eyes. I made delicate things, jewelry, sculptures. My hands were always busy. But after the war, there was nothing left to create. Daniel paused, glancing at her slender fingers. Your hands still seem skilled. Maybe it's time you used them again. Vekra laughed softly, the sound surprising even herself. What would I make in a place like this? Daniel smiled. Anything you want. His words stayed with her long after she left for the night. No one had ever spoken to her like that before, as if her dreams still mattered. A growing bond. As weeks passed, their friendship deepened. Daniel wasn't like the other humans she had met. He didn't treat her like a stray or a problem. He listened. He cared. And for reasons she couldn't fully understand, being around him made her feel safe. One afternoon, as Vekra repaired a malfunctioning machine in the lab, Daniel watched her with quiet admiration. She had learned quickly, her sharp mind picking up complex concepts with ease. You're a fast learner, he said, offering her a cup of warm tea. Vekra accepted it with a grateful smile. I like learning. It keeps my mind busy. He leaned against the workbench, studying her face. You deserve more than just staying busy, Vekra. You deserve a real future. The warmth in his voice stirred something deep inside her. She had always thought humans only cared about themselves, but Daniel was different. In his eyes, she wasn't just an alien struggling to survive. She was someone who mattered. Facing the world's judgment. Not everyone approved of their growing friendship. Whispers spread through the upper district. Humans who had never cared about Vekra's existence before suddenly noticed her presence. Some neighbors frowned when they saw her enter Daniel's house. Others whispered cruel words when they thought she couldn't hear. She's just using him, one woman murmured. She doesn't belong here, another man scoffed. Vekra tried to ignore the harsh words, but they cut deeper than she wanted to admit. She had fought so hard just to survive. Why did people judge her for accepting kindness? One evening, as she left Daniel's house, she heard two guards talking. Why does he keep that alien around? One said. The other laughed coldly. Maybe he feels sorry for her, but she'll never be one of us. Vekra clenched her fists but kept walking. She had faced worse in her life. Yet the fear crept in. What if these whispers caused Daniel to change his mind? What if he realized she didn't belong in his world? A moment of doubt. The next day, Vecra arrived later than usual, her heart heavy with worry. She found Daniel in the lab, bent over a blueprint, his brow furrowed in thought. "Is something wrong?" she asked softly. He looked up, his expression softening when he saw her. "No, actually, everything's better when you're here," he admitted. His words made her heart race, but she lowered her gaze. "People are talking," she said quietly. "They don't like me being here." Daniel's smile faded, and a shadow crossed his face. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Vecra braced herself for the words she feared, that he would ask her to leave. But instead, Daniel stepped closer. "I don't care what they think," he said firmly. "You've earned your place here. I trust you, Vecra." His words lifted a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying. No one had ever defended her before, not like this. "You're not just helping me," he continued, a soft warmth in his eyes. "You're my friend, and I'm glad you're here." Vecra's heart swelled with something unfamiliar, hope. For the first time in years, she felt like she belonged. And maybe, just maybe, the world's judgment didn't matter as long as Daniel believed in her. But neither of them knew that their friendship was about to change everything, not just for themselves, but for everyone around them. Days turned into weeks, and Vecra's life continued to change in ways she never imagined. The cold, harsh streets of Haven 3 felt like a distant memory now. Every morning, she walked through the guarded gates without fear. She had a purpose, a place where she was wanted, and most of all, someone who saw her as more than just a stray. Daniel treated her like an equal, a friend. He taught her new skills, trusted her with his research, and more importantly, he listened to her. In his presence, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. One afternoon, as sunlight poured through the wide glass windows of the lab, Vecra worked on a broken energy stabilizer. Her slender fingers moved carefully, adjusting the delicate circuits. Beside her, Daniel leaned over a holographic blueprint, studying his next project. "You know," Daniel said suddenly, his voice warm, "you could become a real engineer if you wanted. You have the skill for it." Vecra froze for a moment, the small tool in her hand trembling slightly. She had never considered such a thing. Aliens like her were rarely given opportunities in human cities. The idea of a real career, of creating something meaningful, felt impossible. "You really think so?" she asked quietly, her voice filled with doubt. Daniel turned toward her, his eyes kind and honest. "I know so. You've already fixed things I couldn't. If anyone deserves a better life, it's you." His words stayed with her. For so long, survival had been her only goal. But now, a new dream began to take shape, one where she wasn't just surviving. She was building a future. The gift. That evening, as the lab grew quiet, Daniel reached into a small drawer and pulled out a simple, elegant box. He walked over to where Vecra stood, carefully placing the box in her hands. "What is this?" she asked, looking up at him with wide eyes. "A gift," he said with a soft smile. "Open it." Vecra hesitated before lifting the lid. Inside was a delicate toolset, polished and precise, far better than the worn tools she had been using. Each piece gleamed under the soft light, and the sight took her breath away. "I noticed you've been using old equipment," Daniel explained. "I thought maybe these would help." Vecra's fingers traced the edges of the tools, overwhelmed by the gesture. No one had ever given her a gift before. Not like this. "Why are you so kind to me?" she asked softly, her voice trembling slightly. Daniel's expression grew serious. "Because you deserve kindness, Vecra, and because I care about you." Her heart pounded in her chest. For so long, she had believed humans only saw her as a burden. But here was someone who treated her differently, someone who believed in her worth. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. No one's ever done something like this for me." "You don't need to thank me," Daniel said gently. "I'm just glad you're here." At that moment, the cold, distant world outside seemed to fade away. All that remained was the warmth between them, a quiet understanding that neither of them needed to speak aloud. A night of stars. Later that night, Daniel led Vecra to the rooftop garden of his home. It was a peaceful place, filled with soft lights and flowering plants from distant worlds. The sky above shimmered with stars, stretching far beyond the limits of Haven 3. "You don't see stars like this in the lower districts," Vecra murmured, her voice full of wonder. Daniel smiled as he leaned against the railing. "I used to come up here when I needed to think," he admitted. "It reminds me that there's more to life than this city." Vecra stood beside him, the cool breeze brushing against her face. For the first time in years, she felt something she thought was lost: hope. "Do you ever wonder what's out there?" she asked, her gaze fixed on the distant stars. "All the time," Daniel said softly. "There's so much we don't know, so much to discover." A quiet pause stretched between them before he spoke again. "Maybe one day we could explore it together." Vecra's heart skipped a beat. The idea of a future beyond Haven 3, a future where she wasn't alone, felt almost too good to be true. But as she turned to face Daniel, she saw the sincerity in his eyes. "You really mean that?" she asked quietly. "I do," he said without hesitation. "I want you to be part of my future, Vecra." His words wrapped around her heart, filling the emptiness that had been there for so long. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that she belonged, not just in his world, but in his life. And as the stars above shimmered brightly, Vecra knew that her journey was only beginning. Something deeper, something stronger, was growing between them. And no matter what the world thought, they would face the future together. Life in Daniel's home became more than just work for Vecra. Each day, they grew closer. She no longer felt like a stranger in the human city. Daniel's kindness had given her something she had lost long ago: hope. But not everyone welcomed her presence. Whispers still followed her wherever she went. The humans in the upper district did not trust aliens, and many believed she did not belong there. Vecra tried to ignore the cold stares, but deep inside, fear lingered. One afternoon, while organizing Daniel's research files, Vecra found a locked datapad on his desk. She had never seen it before. Its surface was smooth and marked with the official seal of the Human Science Council, a powerful organization that controlled advanced technology. Curiosity tugged at her, but she respected Daniel's privacy. Just as she turned away, the lab door slid open, and Daniel entered, his expression tense. "You found it," he said quietly, noticing the datapad in her hands. "I didn't open it," Vecra said quickly. I was just cleaning." Daniel sighed, walking over to take the datapad. His usual warmth seemed distant, as if a heavy burden rested on his shoulders. "Is something wrong?" she asked softly, concern filling her voice. He hesitated, his fingers tightening around the datapad. For a moment, it seemed as if he wouldn't answer. But then he spoke. "This isn't just a research lab," he admitted. "I'm working on something important, something dangerous." Vecra's heart pounded. She had always known Daniel's work was advanced, but she had never imagined it could be dangerous. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel placed the datapad on the desk and turned to face her. "It's an energy core," he said. "A new kind, powerful enough to fuel an entire city or destroy one." His word hung heavy in the air. Vecra's mind raced with questions. Why would the council want something like that? "They say it's for peaceful use," Daniel explained, his voice bitter. "But I know better. If the wrong people get control of this technology, they could use it as a weapon." Vecra's chest tightened with worry. She had seen the destruction human weapons could cause. Her own world had suffered because of it. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked quietly. Daniel stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "Because I trust you, and I need your help." A difficult choice. For the next few days, Tension filled the lab. Daniel worked long hours on the energy core, and Vecra helped wherever she could. But fear gnawed at her heart. If the Human Science Council discovered how much Daniel had told her, they would both be in danger. Late one night, as she finished adjusting a cooling unit, Daniel sat beside her, exhaustion etched on his face. "You don't have to stay," he said softly. "If this gets too dangerous." "I'm not leaving," Vecra interrupted firmly. "You gave me a home when no one else did. I won't abandon you now." Her words seemed to lift a weight from his shoulders. Without thinking, Daniel reached out, gently placing his hand over hers. "I'm glad you're here," he said, his voice warm. For a moment, the danger around them faded. All Vecra felt was the warmth of his touch and the quiet comfort of knowing she wasn't alone. The warning. The next morning, as Vecra walked toward the lab, a sharp voice stopped her. "You don't belong here." Vecra turned to see a tall, stern-faced man in a sleek black uniform, the mark of the Human Science Council. His cold eyes scanned her with suspicion. "I know what you are," he continued, "and I know you've been helping Daniel. Aliens like you, you're a risk." "I'm not a threat," Vecra said calmly, though her heart raced. The man smiled coldly. "Stay out of things you don't understand. If you don't, we will remove you. Permanently." Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Vecra frozen in place. Fear twisted in her stomach. The council was watching them, and they would not hesitate to destroy anyone who stood in their way. A promise. That night, Vecra told Daniel about the warning. His jaw tightened with anger. "They have no right to threaten you," he said. "They're afraid," Vecra said softly. "Afraid of what you're building. Afraid of anyone who doesn't fit their perfect world." Daniel took a deep breath, his anger melting into determination. "I won't let them hurt you. No matter what happens, I'll protect you." His words settled deep in her heart. No one had ever promised to protect her before. "I'm not afraid," she said quietly. "As long as we're together, I'll fight for this." A small smile tugged at Daniel's lips. "Then we'll face whatever comes, together." And in that quiet moment, as the city slept around them, they knew their bond was stronger than fear. But the Human Science Council was not finished, and soon the true danger would begin. Days passed, but the weight of the council's warning hung over Vecra and Daniel like a storm cloud. Despite the threat, they continued working on the energy core, knowing it was too important to leave unfinished. Vecra grew more skilled each day. She learned to calibrate delicate circuits and stabilize energy flows. Daniel trusted her with tasks no one else could handle, but beneath their quiet routine, danger crept closer. One evening, as the sun dipped below the towering skyline, Daniel's voice broke the silence in the lab. "They're watching us," he said, his tone low and serious. Vecra looked up from the device she was repairing. "I know," she admitted. "I feel their eyes every time I walk through the district." Daniel sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "The council doesn't trust me anymore. They think I'm hiding something." "Are you?" Vecra asked softly. His eyes met hers, filled with quiet determination. "Yes, I'm hiding you." Her heart skipped a beat. She knew the risk he was taking by keeping her close. If the council discovered how much he cared, they would punish them both. "I never wanted to put you in danger," he continued, "but I can't let them take this technology. In the wrong hands, it could destroy everything." Vecra stepped closer, her voice steady. "I'm not leaving, Daniel. We're in this together." His tension eased, and a small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "Together," he echoed. "A risky plan." The next day, Daniel revealed his plan. He wanted to hide the energy core, somewhere the council could never find it. If they took his research, the core would still be safe. "We can't trust anyone," he said as they worked late into the night. "If they get this, it's over." Vecra nodded, her hand steady despite the fear gnawing at her heart. "Where will we hide it?" "There's an abandoned sector beneath the city," Daniel explained. Old tunnels from before the war. No one goes there now. It's perfect. The thought of sneaking into forbidden zones was dangerous, but Vecra knew it was their only chance. I'll help you, she said without hesitation. Daniel's eyes softened. I don't deserve you, Vecra. She smiled faintly. Maybe not, but I'm here anyway. Into the darkness. 2 nights later, they'd made their move. Under the cover of darkness, Daniel and Vecra slipped out of the upper district. The city's lights faded as they entered the old industrial zone, an area long abandoned after the last alien-human conflict. Vecra led the way through the broken streets. She had survived here once, and her memory of the hidden paths was still sharp. This way, she whispered, pulling Daniel toward a rusted service hatch. The metal groaned as they opened it, revealing a tunnel that plunged deep beneath the city. Cold air swept over them, carrying the scent of dust and rust. Are you sure about this? Daniel asked quietly. Vecra nodded. No one comes here. It's the safest place. They climbed down carefully, the energy core secured in a shielded case on Daniel's back. The tunnel stretched in darkness, but Vecra's sharp eyes spotted the path forward. After an hour of walking, they found a hidden chamber, an old storage vault sealed behind layers of steel. It took both of them to pry the door open, but when they did, the space inside was perfect. We'll hide it here, Daniel said, placing the case on a metal shelf. If anything happens to me, you know where to find it. Vecra's chest tightened at his words. Nothing will happen to you, she said firmly. Daniel smiled, though the worry never left his eyes. I hope you're right. A growing fear. As they returned to the surface, the city seemed colder, more dangerous. Vecra couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching them. That night, as she sat across from Daniel in the quiet lab, she finally voiced her fear. They won't stop, she said softly. The council, they'll come for us. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his expression serious. Let them come, he said. I'm not afraid of them. But Vecra was. She had seen what humans did to those who defied their rules, and she knew the council would not forgive Daniel's betrayal. I won't let them hurt you, she whispered, more to herself than to him. Daniel's gaze softened, and he reached across the table, taking her hand in his. We'll face whatever happens together. His touch was warm, steady, and in that moment, Vecra knew she would protect him, no matter the cost. The council strikes. But the Human Science Council was already moving. Hidden eyes had followed them into the tunnels, and as the first light of dawn touched the city, an official order was sent. They would bring Daniel in for questioning, and if Vecra got in the way, she would not be spared. Their time was running out. The morning after their secret mission, the air in the lab felt heavier. Vecra couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She moved carefully, adjusting a circuit panel, but her mind stayed on the energy core hidden beneath the city. Daniel tried to act normal, but Vecra noticed the tension in his shoulders. He was worried, and so was she. The Human Science Council did not give warnings without reason. Sooner or later, they would come. And they did. By midday, the lab's security system beeped sharply. Vecra froze as the screen displayed an alert. Unauthorized visitors detected. They're here, Daniel said quietly, his face pale. Before Vecra could respond, the lab door slid open, and 3 council officers stepped inside. Their black uniforms gleamed under the bright lab lights, and their cold eyes locked onto Daniel. The man in front, the same officer who had threatened Vecra before, spoke in a sharp, commanding tone. Daniel, you are under investigation for unauthorized research and withholding advanced technology. You will come with us now. Vecra's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to speak, to protect him, but she knew the council did not show mercy. I'm not hiding anything, Daniel said calmly, though Vecra saw the tension in his jaw. The lead officer stepped closer. We will decide that. If you resist, the consequences will be severe. Vecra clenched her fists. She couldn't let them take him. Not after everything they had built together. A desperate move. Before the officers could reach him, Daniel took a step forward. "I'll go," he said quietly, glancing at Vecra. His eyes held a silent message. "Stay safe. Don't fight them." But Vecra couldn't just let him leave. Not like this. "Wait," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her heart. "He hasn't done anything wrong." The lead officer turned his cold gaze toward her. "You should stay silent, alien. This matter does not concern you." Vecra's hands shook with anger, but she held her ground. "It concerns me if you take him. He's trying to protect people. You should be helping him, not treating him like a criminal." For a moment, the officer's face hardened with annoyance. Then, without warning, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small silver device. He held it up to the air, scanning. A chill ran down Vecra's spine. "They're searching for the energy core." Daniel tensed beside her. He knew the truth. If the scanner detected any trace of the core, their secret would be exposed. But after a few long seconds, the device beeped softly and showed nothing. The hidden vault beneath the city had worked. The officer frowned but slipped the device back into his coat. "You're lucky," he said coldly. "For now." Without another word, the officers turned and led Daniel out of the lab. Vecra's heart ached as the door closed behind them. She had to get him back. A dangerous choice. For hours, Vecra paced the empty lab, her mind racing. She knew where they had taken him. Council Tower, the most secure building in Haven 3. If they decided he was guilty, they could lock him away, or worse. A part of her wanted to run, to disappear back into the lower city. But she couldn't leave Daniel. Not after everything he had done for her. "I won't let them hurt you," she whispered to herself. Vecra's sharp mind began working. She knew the Council's systems were strong, but no system was perfect. If she could break into their data network, she might find a way to free Daniel. And she knew exactly where to start. Grabbing her new toolset, the one Daniel had given her, she slipped out of the lab and disappeared into the city's shadowy alleys. Into the lion's den. By nightfall, Vecra stood outside Council Tower. The building stretched high into the sky, its glass walls glowing with blue lights. Security drones hovered nearby, scanning for threats. Most people wouldn't dare to go near the tower, but Vecra wasn't most people. She found an old service entrance hidden behind a broken storage unit. Using her tools, she disabled the security lock and slipped inside. The air was cold, filled with the hum of machines. Moving quickly and quietly, she navigated the narrow maintenance tunnels until she reached the main data hub. This was where the Council stored everything: files, prisoner records, and classified technology. Her hands worked swiftly, connecting her small device to the terminal. Lines of code flashed across the screen. "Come on. Where are you, Daniel?" After several tense minutes, she found his location, a high-security holding cell on the 45th floor. But there was something else, a countdown timer flashing in red. Her breath caught in her throat. They're planning to transfer him off-world. If that happened, she would lose him forever. Vecra's heart pounded. She had to act now. A promise to keep. She transmitted false clearance codes, unlocking the service elevator. With a deep breath, she stepped inside and pressed the button for the 45th floor. As the elevator rose, her mind flashed back to the night Daniel gave her the toolset, the night he promised to protect her. Now, it was her turn to protect him. When the doors slid open, Vecra moved swiftly through the quiet hallway. She found Daniel's cell, the electronic lock glowing softly. "Hold on, Daniel," she whispered, as her fingers danced over the keypad. The lock beeped. The door slid open. Daniel looked up in shock. "Vecra, what are you?" "No time." She cut him off, pulling him to his feet. "They're planning to take you off-world. We have to go. Now." His face hardened with resolve. "Let's finish this." Together, they disappeared into the shadows, knowing the battle was far from over. But as long as they stood side by side, they wouldn't stop fighting. Not until they were truly free. The cold night air hit Vecra and Daniel. As they slipped out of Council Tower, alarms blared behind them, flashing red lights cutting through the darkness. They had escaped the holding cell. But the Human Science Council wouldn't let them go easily. "We need to reach the tunnels," Vecra said, pulling Daniel toward the industrial zone. It was the only place where they could hide safely, and where the energy core remained hidden. "They'll send patrols after us," Daniel warned, glancing back at the towering building. "But we can't let them find the core. If they do, everything is over." Vecra's heart pounded, but she nodded. "We won't let them win." Side by side, they ran through the city's back alleys, keeping to the shadows. The sound of distant drones echoed through the empty streets, searching for them. The chase begins. As they neared the industrial zone, a sleek black hovercraft appeared overhead. Its bright spotlight cut across the ground, sweeping the area. "They found us," Daniel gasped. Vecra grabbed his hand. "This way." She led him through a broken fence and into the maze of abandoned factories. The air was thick with dust, and the sharp smell of rust filled their lungs. Behind them, the hovercraft lowered, releasing 3 council officers. Their heavy boots thudded against the ground as they pursued the fugitives. Vecra's mind raced. If the officers caught them, they wouldn't just take Daniel. They would find the energy core. And if the council controlled that power, no one would be safe. "We're almost there," she urged, pushing herself to move faster. A dangerous decision. At last, they reached the old service hatch, the hidden entrance to the underground tunnels. Daniel knelt quickly, pulling the metal cover aside. "Go first," he said. "I'll close it behind us." Vecra hesitated, but "No arguing," Daniel said firmly, his eyes locked on hers. "Trust me." She nodded and slipped inside, her feet landing on the cold stone below. Moments later, Daniel followed, shutting the hatch just as the officers' voices echoed nearby. In the safety of the tunnels, Vecra let out a shaky breath. "We made it." Daniel smiled faintly. "For now." They hurried deeper into the underground, the dim light from Vecra's small wrist lamp guiding the way. When they reached the hidden chamber, the energy core still sat safely inside its shielded case. "We can't leave it here anymore," Daniel said quietly. "They're too close." Vecra agreed. "But where can we hide something this powerful?" Daniel's mind worked quickly. "We don't hide it. We destroy it." Her eyes widened. "Destroy it? But you worked so hard." "I built it to help people," he interrupted gently. "But if the council uses it as a weapon, it will destroy lives. We can't let that happen." Vecra's heart ached at the thought of losing the thing they had worked so hard to protect. But she knew Daniel was right. "I'll help you," she said softly. The final stand. Together, they began dismantling the energy core, carefully removing its most dangerous components. Daniel worked swiftly, his hands steady despite the weight of his decision. As they finished, the tunnel shook with distant footsteps. The council had found the entrance. Time was running out. "They're coming," Vecra whispered. Daniel handed her a small power cell, the core's heart. "Take this. If anything happens to me, you must destroy it." "I'm not leaving you," Vecra said firmly, her fingers curling around the power cell. A faint smile touched Daniel's lips. "I knew you'd say that." The tunnel door burst open, and the officers flooded inside, their weapons raised. "Step away from the device," the lead officer ordered, his cold eyes narrowing. Daniel stood tall, shielding Vecra with his body. "It's already over," he said calmly. "The core is dismantled. You lost." The officer's face twisted in anger. "You think this ends here? You have no idea how far our reach goes." Vecra's anger burned bright. She had lived under the council's shadow long enough. No more. "No matter how much power you take," she said boldly, "you can't control everyone. Not forever." The officer raised his weapon, but before he could fire, Daniel pressed a remote trigger in his hand. A burst of energy erupted from the dismantled core, knocking the officers backward and shutting down their weapons. In the confusion, Vecra grabbed Daniel's hand. "Let's go." Together, they ran back through the tunnels, leaving the council behind in the chaos. A new beginning. By dawn, Vecra and Daniel emerged from the underground, far from the city's reach. The sun rose over the horizon, painting the sky with soft gold and pink hues. "We did it," Vecra whispered, still holding the power cell. "It's over." Daniel shook his head slowly. "Not over, but we're free. And as long as we have each other, we'll keep fighting for what's right." Vecra smiled, feeling warmth spread through her heart. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving, she was living. And she knew that as long as Daniel stood by her side, no power in the galaxy could break them. Hand in hand, they walked toward the unknown future, ready to face whatever came next, together.